Howdy, Central. Let's go to Ecclesiastes chapter 3 as we are marching our way bit by bit through the book of Ecclesiastes together. And, when I was in high school, I hated to read. And it's funny because I love to read now. I read as much as I can, but I hated to read. And so I was always buying Cliff's Notes and doing everything I could to get out of reading. And I don't know if it's because I just didn't like what we were reading back then or if something changed with me or what. But I liked when the teachers assigned short stories because they were short. And I can't tell you that I remember all that much about high school and what I learned there, but I remember a name because it was such a funny name and it was fun to say. I remember the name of Guy de Maupassant. Guy de Maupassant was a 19th century author who is known as the father of the short story. So he's kind of a hero of mine. He invented the short stuff that I got to read in high school. I mean, he wrote over 300 short stories. This guy was prolific, and he lived the good life. It was said of him, critics praised him, men admired him, and women adored him. He was rich and famous. He had everything he wanted except extra days. He lived to be 42. Yeah, he died of syphilis. And in his last days, he was actually committed to an asylum because he was going crazy with this overwhelming fear of death. He knew it was coming. He knew there was nothing he could do about it. He knew he couldn't prolong his days, and it absolutely terrified him. You know, there's a word for having that, a really unnatural fear of death. The word is thanatophobia. And I would say most people don't have thanatophobia, where they just obsess over death, although I've known some people who are kind of that way. But maybe you're a person who's afraid of dying. And maybe you say, oh, I'm not really afraid of dying, but you really don't want to think about it. And you really don't want to talk about it, and you're kind of wishing I was going in a different direction today because you know you're going to have to think about it today. Maybe it's just frightening, or maybe it's just depressing to think about death. I wonder if you've heard of Jonathan Edwards. He's one of my spiritual heroes. Jonathan Edwards was a pastor. He was sort of one of the last in the line of the Puritan pastors in the 18th century in New England, and he became the president of Princeton University. He also died fairly young. But when Edwards was 18, he sat down and started writing some resolutions for his life. And he spent about a year writing 70 resolutions. And I think that you should go Google them sometime, but not right now because I'm preaching. And look at these resolutions. They're incredibly deep for a man of his age. One of his resolutions was resolved to think much on all occasions of my own dying and the common circumstances which attend death. Now, why would this young man say, I'm going to try to think about my own death as much as possible? Is it because he was morbid? Is it because he was obsessed with it? No, listen, he explains in a couple of other resolutions. Resolved never to do anything which I should be afraid to do if it were the last hour of my life. He wanted to think about death all the time so he could live as if he's just about to die. Another of his resolutions, resolved that I will live so as I shall wish I had done when I come to die. Guy de Maupassant couldn't stop thinking about death, and he thought about death with fear and dread, and it drove him crazy. Jonathan Edwards thought about death all the time, and it inspired him to live a life very well lived. Well, as we come to this passage in Ecclesiastes, we see another man thinking about death. He's near the end of his life. He's an old man. He's looking back on what he's done with his life. He's thinking about death, and he's troubled by what he sees. We're in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, and the first part of this we looked at last week. There's a time under the sun for everything. There's a time for this, and a time for that, and a time for this, and a time for that. And as we get to verse 16, where we're picking up today, he says, moreover, I saw under the sun that in the place of justice, even there was wickedness. And in the place of righteousness, even there was wickedness. I said in my heart, God will judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time for every matter and for every work. I said in my heart with regard to the children of man that God is testing them, that they may see that they themselves are but beasts. For what happens to the children of man and what happens to the beasts is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. They all have the same breath, and man has no advantage over the beasts, for all is vanity. All go to one place, all are from the dust, and to dust all return. Chipper, isn't he? Who knows whether the spirit of man goes upward and the spirit of the beast goes down into the earth? So I saw that there's nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his work, for that is his lot. Who can bring him to see what will be after him? In chapter 4. Again, I saw all the oppressions that are done under the sun, and behold, the tears of the oppressed, and they had no one to comfort them. On the side of their oppressors there was power, and there was no one to comfort them. And I thought the dead who are already dead more fortunate than the living who are still alive. But better than both is he who's not yet been and has not seen the evil deeds that are done under the sun. Well, Solomon points out some interesting things here, some obvious things. Like I told you when we started Ecclesiastes, we're not going to learn anything new here. In fact, that's what Solomon's saying. There's nothing new under the sun. But one of the things we see here that he's talking about is that life is not fair. He says in verse 16, in the place of justice, even there was wickedness. In the place of righteousness, even there was wickedness. He's talking about the judges, the people that are supposed to make the decisions, the people that are supposed to do the right things. There's wickedness there. He's talking about in the place of righteousness, even among the religious leaders, there's wickedness there. It's just not fair. He's troubled by the fact that death is indiscriminate. Good people, evil people, and animals die. We all breathe the same air. We all turn back into the same dust. Life just is not fair. Isn't this one of the hardest lessons to learn? I remember as a young man in high school when this hit me really hard. I was a junior in high school, and I was trying everything I could do to get accepted to the Air Force Academy. I really, really, really wanted to go to the Air Force Academy, and no matter what I did, I kept getting rejection letters. Rejection letter, rejection letter. That year they had 17,000 applicants for 1,100 openings. And they weren't going to look at me for anything. For one thing, they go back to ninth grade. My ninth grade year was a disaster. But I was doing everything I could. I was taking chemistry and physics and analytical geometry and trigonometry and calculus and just doing everything I could. And I was making really good grades. And I was getting rejected at every term. Well, in my chemistry class was a jock that I became friends with, which was weird. I was not friends with the jocks. This guy was a football player. I'm not going to say his name because he went on to have an NFL career, but he wasn't the brightest guy I'd ever met. And so I was not a Christian back then. I cheated him through chemistry. I did all his work for him. We were lab partners. I did all the work. I got him all the way through chemistry. This guy loved me. And he shows up to school one day. He sat right in front of me in chemistry. I'm sitting at my desk. He walks in and he goes, "Hey, what's that Air Force thing you're trying to do?" I said, "You talking about the Air Force Academy?" He goes, "Yeah, is this it?" He hands me a letter. "Dear Mr. So-and-so from the Air Force Academy, we would be so honored if you would consider attending the United States Air Force Academy. We would love to fly you and your family up for an all-expense-paid trip to visit our campus and meet with our representatives. Thank you very much." It was a really good lesson for me, wasn't it? That was a really good lesson to learn all along. I'm afraid we're teaching our kids today that life is fair. You came in 12th in the race today. Here's your gold medal. Everybody gets a gold medal. You lost the game. Here's your gold medal. Or we tell our kids, you play a game. Who won? Everybody won. No, they didn't. Everybody did not win. When my daughter was playing softball in those early leagues where they kept score, she'd go, "Who won?" And I'd go, "Y'all lost. You were terrible." Oh. Or I'd say, "Don't let them fool you. You killed them. Great game. I'm afraid adults nowadays expect everything to be handed to them because that's fair. But you know what? Even if we teach them, no, you need to work hard if you're going to get anything. You need to be honest if you're going to get ahead. You need to do the right thing. We know that sometimes it's the bad guys and sometimes it's the less talented and sometimes it's the lazy that get the breaks, isn't it? Why? Because life is just not fair. And that's why Solomon is speculating that those already dead are better off. Yeah, those people are dead. They don't have to put up with this anymore. And better than that are the people who hadn't even been born yet because they don't even have to experience all the injustice in the world. Not only that, in the end, everybody winds up in the cemetery. What happens to the children of man and what happens to the beast is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. But that's another issue that he brings up. And this is really where he's going here. And that's that death is a mystery. Verse 21, he says, who knows whether the spirit of man goes upward and the spirit of beast goes down into the earth? What happens when we die? That's the big question, isn't it? That's a question that everyone wrestles with. And I've asked people, have you ever thought about what happens when you die? Nope, don't think about it at all. Yeah, you do. You have to think about this. What happens when we die? You get lots of answers. I hear people talk about what happens when people die. Oh, there's a bright light, and at the end of the tunnel is, your loved ones and all that. Or, so-and-so died and got his wings. Or so-and-so's now looking down on us. Or so-and-so's here with us. Or so-and-so's now one with the universe. Or some people just, well, you die. And that's it. You live, you die, and it's all over. When we read the Bible, of course, we reject all those things, but it's a good question, isn't it? Who can know what happens? In verse 22, that's what he says, the last part of verse 22. Who can bring him to see what will be after him? In other words, Solomon says, we don't know what happens when you die because nobody goes there and comes back and tells us. Nobody ever dies and then gets up and tells us about it. Now, a lot of people have said that today. In fact, there's been a booming industry the last few years, what we like to call heaven tourism. All these best-selling books, some of them made into movies, about people who die and go to heaven and come back and tell us their experiences. For a while, that was the fad, is for preachers. Certain preachers were having this experience where they were getting taken to heaven. Jesse Duplantis down our way from New Orleans where we were was talked about going to heaven in the golden gondola with the angel Gabriel and Jesus showing him all his designer furniture and his favorite brands of furniture and everything in his mansion and all that kind of stuff. Everybody's coming back to tell us. You know that one problem with that is if you'll read these books and hear these stories, they're all so inconsistent that it's beyond believability. If they're all going to the same place and coming back and talking about it, shouldn't they share the same story? So we're still left scratching our heads. But what if somebody could come back? What if somebody actually died? They died and they came back to tell us about it. Would it matter? You remember Jesus tells a story about two men. One is a rich man who is opulent and he's just cruel. And the other is a poor man named Lazarus. And Lazarus actually fights with the dogs to get the scraps that fall off the table. And he lives right outside the rich man's house. They both die. Lazarus goes to heaven. Rich man goes to hell. And Jesus telling this story says the rich man looks up and sees Lazarus being comforted in heaven. And he says, please, let him just dip his finger in water and touch my tongue. Just a drop, because I'm in these flames. Nope. And he says, then send Lazarus back to tell my brothers. Send Lazarus back to tell my brothers so they don't come here. And you know what the answer was? Well, no, because they already have the scriptures which tell them this. But he says, even if a person were to come back from the dead and tell them what waits, they would not listen. Wouldn't matter. Nevertheless, Just like Solomon, what we do know is that there has to be more. That's what he's saying in verse 17. He's looking at the injustice, he's pondering these things, but he says in his heart, he knows, basically deep down in his heart, God's going to judge the righteous and the wicked. There is a time for all that. He knows that there has to be more. It would seem that a lot of people had realized this too late. With what I do for a living, over the past 20-something years as a pastor, I have spent time with dying people. I've been in the room as people drew their last breath. And I'm here to tell you that Christians and non-Christians die differently. Julian Huxley was an evolutionary biologist and a staunch atheist and a critic of Christianity. His last words, "So it's true after all. So it's true after all." And he breathed his last. David Hume, the atheistic philosopher, a skeptic and a critic of all belief in God, his last words just before he drew his last breath, "I am in flames." Voltaire, you've probably heard of Voltaire. Voltaire boasted that in his lifetime, Christianity would be eradicated. It would be gone. His last words, "I am abandoned by God and man. I shall die and go to hell alone." By the way, just an interesting side note. A couple of years after he died, the Geneva Bible Society bought his house and started printing Bibles there. Thomas Paine, the patriot, the American patriot, who was a skeptic, who had no use for the organized church, said, "I would give worlds if I had them that the age of reason," his attack on religion, that the age of reason had never been published. As he lay dying, he said, "Oh Lord, help me. Christ, help me." And then he said, "No, don't leave. Stay with me. Send even a child to stay with me, for I'm on the edge of hell here alone. If ever the devil had an agent, I have been that one." Sir Walter Scott, the skeptic, said, "Until this moment, I thought there was neither a God nor a hell. Now I know there are both, and I am doomed to perdition by the just judgment of the Almighty." Even Anton LaVey, the writer of the Satanic Bible, the founder of the Church of Satan, called by Rolling Stone magazine the evilest man alive. His dying words, oh my, what have I done? There's something very wrong. There's something very wrong." And he was gone. There has to be more. Even the hardened skeptic knows. Some of them have even acknowledged that with their last breath. But many still reject the idea of any kind of final justice. Many people reject the idea of any kind of life outside this world. Prevailing belief today in much of the world that is growing in some areas, especially in academia, is that of naturalism, atheistic naturalism. I don't know if you're familiar with the term naturalism, but naturalism is the belief that nature is all there is. That the natural world is all there is, that the laws of physics are all there is, and that we are bound by the laws of nature, and there is no supernatural, there is no soul that lives on, there is no spiritual realm, there is no deity. Everything that exists is purely natural, and everything that happens has a natural explanation for it. Sounds like that's what Solomon's saying, except for his belief that he knows there's going to be justice. But we're told often today, as Christians, aren't we, that naturalism is for the intelligent. We're told how religion is opposed to science. What hogwash that religion is opposed to science. Some of those brilliant scientists alive today are born-again Christians. Maybe you've heard this: science is the only means to truth and reality. I've talked to so many people who say, science is the only way we can know any kind of truth. Really? How did science prove that? Was there a scientific experiment to justify what you just said? But I want to think about this for just a minute. By the way, these folks, it's not science that they're concerned with. It's something we call scientism. It is faith. It is a blind faith that science can do what science never intended to do. So what's wrong with this idea of naturalism? As Solomon is struggling this, what happens when we die? Do we go up? Do the beasts go down? Is there anything after? Surely there's going to be justice. What's going to happen? Is it just better not to live? How do we answer the skeptics today? What is wrong with this naturalistic worldview? Let me just give you 3 things wrong with it in case I'm sure you know people who hold to this. Number 1, naturalism cannot work practically. It just doesn't, where you can't live out a purely naturalistic worldview. And let me just give you one reason why you can't. One is morality. Where do you come up with morality? Where do you come up with what's right and wrong? If everything that happens is just a random biological and or chemical accident, then where does right or wrong come from? I always get tickled when the naturalist says, well, why is there so much evil in the world? Well, what's evil? Well, it's wrong to kill people. Why? Why is it wrong to kill people? Maybe they were getting in the way. Maybe they were impeding advancement. Maybe that's the best thing for the world, right? Who's to say that it's wrong? Do you say it's wrong when an animal in the wild kills another animal in the wild? Well, if we're just highly evolved animals, what is wrong with killing somebody? There is no objective standard. Now, they will respond sometimes, oh, no, we're evolving into higher morality for what's best for the world, and we understand what's best for the world. Really? Have you ever thought of the godless societies like Communist China, North Korea, the Soviet Union? They had no God. Everything was based on atheistic naturalism. They always do what's best, right? North Korea, real paradigm of humanity. I saw Ravi Zacharias. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with Ravi Zacharias or not. In my opinion, he's the finest Christian apologist alive today. Apologist is somebody who defends the Christian faith. And he speaks on college campuses all over the country, well, really all over the world. And he was at a college campus, and he'll make a case for theism, and then he'll entertain questions from the floor, and he just hits them all right there. And a young man stood up and said, well, I have a question. He says, I want to know what you Christians are so afraid of. What are you so afraid of from atheism? Because you don't see atheists out raping and pillaging people. And Ravi said, are you serious? He says, do you lock your doors at night? Guy goes, well, sure I do. He says, why? If we got nothing to be afraid of. If people aren't raping and pillaging, why do you lock your doors at night? Have you ever looked at China? Have you ever looked at North Korea? These atheist regimes, at what they're doing, that's what we're afraid of. So this atheistic naturalism, it's not going to work. But here's a second reason that we shouldn't hold to that kind of worldview. Naturalism just can't explain some things. How can biological reactions explain emotions? How can science give us the reason that we love someone? Now, here's what I've heard. Well, you fall in love because you need to keep your offspring going. And you love your children because biologically you need to protect them to keep your offspring going. That's a natural thing. Well, then why did I grieve so heavily when my dad died? He's not helping anyway in that, is he? Why did I love my dad so much? How do you explain love? It just can't explain certain things. It can't explain abstract ideas, concepts. And you know what atheistic naturalism cannot explain? It cannot explain origins. It can't explain the origins of the universe. It can't explain the origin of life. I love talking to atheists. And they say, I only believe what can be demonstrated by science. Really? Well, where did the universe come from? Big Bang. Okay. Where'd the Big Bang come from? What caused the Big Bang? Why did the Big Bang happen? What was there before the Big Bang? Well, there was nothing before the Big Bang. Oh, so there was no matter. Where did matter come from? Well, science is going to give us an answer someday. That's a lot of faith, y'all. Where did life come from? How did life just spontaneously happen and then, through randomness, develop into the complexity that we see today? Atheistic naturalism, listen, has no answer for that question. So it can't work practically, it can't explain some things, and it can't make truth claims. You know, most atheists today will acknowledge there's no such thing as free will, because they say every thought I have, every decision I make is just because of biological processes firing in the neurons in my brain. There are these things happening in my brain that cause me to think the way I do and to act the way I do, and there's nothing I can do to change it because I can't go back and preordain what my brain's going to be developed like. Well, if that's the case, then what the naturalist believes is really no better than what I believe. And what I believe is no better than what they believe, because it's just all accidents. And if it's just an accident rolling around in my brain, how can I make a truth claim out of it? It's just a biological process that doesn't really mean anything. Really, atheistic naturalism is so contrary to reason and experience as to be completely absurd. This is what Solomon's wrestling with. He didn't have these terms back then. He didn't have the science back then, but he's wrestling with this concept. Are we just creatures like a cow? We're just born, we live, we die, and that's it? But it can't be, and he knew this. David Berlinski is one of the world's leading physicists, and he's not a Christian. He's an agnostic bordering on atheism. But he sees problems with atheism, with naturalism, with blind faith in science. Listen to what Berlinski said in his book, The Devil's Delusion. Again, this is not a believer. He does not believe in God. Listen to what he says. He's a physicist. Has anyone provided proof of God's inexistence? Not even close. Has quantum cosmology explained the emergence of the universe or why it is here? Not even close. Have our sciences explained why our universe seems to be fine-tuned to allow for the existence of life? Not even close. Are physicists and biologists willing to believe in anything so long as it is not religious thought? Close enough. Has rationalism and moral thought provided us with an understanding of what is good, what is right, and what is moral? Not close enough. Has secularism in the 20th century been a force for good? Not even close to being close. Is there a narrow and oppressive orthodoxy in the sciences? Close enough. Does anything in the sciences or their philosophy justify the claim that religious belief is irrational? Not even in the ballpark. And listen to this. Is scientific atheism a frivolous exercise in intellectual contempt? Dead on. The truth is, there has to be more. There has to be an explanation for who we are, why we're here. And for there to be an explanation of the natural world, the only way we can explain the natural world is there has to be something outside the natural world. There has to be something supernatural, and that something has to be intelligent and personal. Why? Because we're intelligent and personal. Maybe you're afraid of death. Maybe you're struggling with these things. Maybe you're saying, how can we possibly know what happens? Maybe you look at life like Solomon in despair, but here's your takeaway today. One takeaway. You ready for this? It's this. Turn to Jesus so you can live and die without fear. Turn to Jesus so you can live and die without fear. Can I just share with you? I shared with you some really depressing last words of atheists. Let me share with you some last words recorded that some famous Christians said. John Knox is the founder of the Presbyterian Church, a Scottish theologian. He actually didn't have any last words because he couldn't speak, and somebody said to him, "Hast thou any hope?" And he pointed upward and died. David Brainerd, well-known missionary, died at the age of 29 after a lengthy illness, 29 years old. Just before he died, he said, "I'm going into eternity, and it is sweet to me to think of eternity." D.L. Moody, the famous preacher, founder of the Moody Bible Institute, on his deathbed said, "Can this be death? Why, it's better than living. Earth is receding, heaven is opening, this is my coronation day." And he died. John Owen, the Puritan theologian, says, I am going to him whom my soul loveth, or rather who has loved me with an everlasting love, which is the sole ground of all my consolation. The great American patriot, former Senator, Secretary of State Daniel Webster, just before his death, said, the great mystery is Jesus Christ, the gospel. What would the condition of any of us be if we had not the hope of immortality? Thank God the gospel of Jesus Christ brought life and immortality to light, and his very last words were, I am still alive. Turn to Jesus so you can live and die without fear. Now you might be saying, so you just want me to turn to Jesus so I can feel better? So religion's just the opiate of the masses. If I become a Christian, I'll feel better. I don't even have to think anymore. I can just feel all better about everything. No, I want you to become a Christian because Christianity is true. Any worldview that you have, any philosophy of life has to be consistent. It has to work. It has to line up with reality. Atheism does not line up with reality. Atheism can't give you an answer for the single most important questions of life. But Christianity can. A biblically shaped worldview actually makes sense of the world. You know, the earliest defenders of the faith, guys like Justin Martyr and Tertullian, we're talking almost 2,000 years ago, they went around defending Christianity with the same beliefs we do. Let me tell you these three things, and you can just bank on these, and you can use these in your conversations. We believe the Bible to be true. Here are just three bedrock reasons. Number one, it is historically accurate. Everything the Bible has said about history has been verified through archaeology and other historical writings. It has never once been shown to be wrong, although for 2,000 years people have been trying to disprove it, they cannot. So for 2,000 years the Bible is shown to be historically accurate, written over a period of some 1,500 years by numerous authors, and everything it says is true. It's historically accurate. Secondly, it's morally pure. What does secularism give us for morality? What kind of confusion on morality are we seeing in our world today? That's what secularism will get you. Well, we just need to let everybody do whatever they want. How's that working out for us? It's creating chaos in the world. But what if we followed a biblical morality? Biblical morality is actually, it makes sense, it's good, it's healthy. What if you actually got married and stayed married and faithful to your spouse for the rest of your life? And what if you kept that kind of moral code in your life and raised your children like that? How much better would our homes and our society be? What if we maintained sexual fidelity and we taught little boys they're boys? And little girls, they're girls, and help them to be socially and psychologically and emotionally healthy? How much better would our world be? We could eradicate sexually transmitted diseases. We could eradicate this nonsensical phrase called unwanted pregnancy. We could get rid of abortion on demand. We could have gotten rid of AIDS. It's good to follow the biblical way of life. So the Bible is historically accurate, the Bible is morally pure, and the Bible is philosophically true. Now, what do I mean by that? You read the Bible, you look up and look around the world, and everything aligns. Everything makes sense. You read the atheist, you read the atheistic philosophy, you read the atheistic science, you read guys like Richard Dawkins even. And you look around the world and go, does he live in the same place I do? What he's describing doesn't work out here. It doesn't describe what's going on here. But you read the Bible, what happens when you start reading the Bible? You go, oh yeah, that's the way the world is. That explains everything. Everything starts to make sense when you start immersing your mind in Scripture. And because we know the Bible's historically accurate, because it's morally pure, because it's philosophically true, we can believe what it says, and we can believe what it says about Jesus, and the claims that Jesus made were astonishing. You know what Jesus said? This is astonishing. Here's this guy, this rabbi, this carpenter comes along and says, the only way you're going to get to heaven is by believing in me. Are you kidding me? He's either off his rocker, or he's a charlatan, or he's got to back that up somehow. And he did, because he said something else. He said, they're going to kill me, and after they kill me, 3 days later, I'm coming back. Now, that's a claim. What if I stood before you and said, guys, I'm dying next week, but I'm coming back 3 days later? You'd have me committed. Jesus says that. They killed him. He walks right out of the tomb. He just walks around the tent and he goes around showing people. He goes around showing people saying, hey, yeah, you want to feel my scars? You want to put your hand on my side right here? Here, let me have some of that fish you're eating. I mean, he's backing it up. And we know this to be a historical event. It happened. Here's what he said. I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Now, is he contradicting himself? Wait a minute, if I believe in you, I'll die but live. But if I believe in you, I won't die. No, he's saying the same thing. You believe in me, your body's going to die. Your body's going to turn to dust. Your body's going in the ground, but you won't die. Your body's going to die. You won't die. You will live forever. So here we have somebody come along who says, here's how you can live forever. There is an afterlife. There is a real life. And by the way, I'm going to die and come back to show you I know what I'm talking about. How many people do you know who've done that? How many people do you know that have the keys to the grave? Jesus has the keys to the grave. So Solomon asked if someone could come back and tell us. The rich man said, oh, if only someone could come back from the grave and go tell my brothers. Well, somebody did. And because he did, you don't have to be afraid. Let me tell you just how God works. Funny thing happened yesterday. I'm working on this sermon about what happens when we die when the Jehovah's Witness comes over. So he comes in, I say, hey, sit down, this is awesome. Do y'all get excited when they come? I do, man, that's the best thing. In fact, Terry went to the door, she's going, don't leave. Hold on. Mike, get out of your pajamas. So I go in there, sit down. He goes, I'm here to ask you one question today. What do you think happens when we die? I'm so happy. And then he wouldn't let me answer. He wanted to tell me about what happens when we die. He says, that's our topic today because a lot of people don't know what happens when they die, and a lot of people are uncertain about when they die. And he says, do you feel certain like you know what's going to happen? I said, oh, yeah, buddy. I definitely know what's going to happen when I die. And so I started talking to him, and he goes, well, been good talking to you. And I said, wait. You don't have to leave, do you? He goes, oh, yeah, I got people waiting in the car for me. I said, oh, can't you stay for a minute? I said, I really want to share the gospel with you. He said, oh, I think we're probably on the same page about that. I said, oh, no. We are not on the same page about that. And he said, well, you know, it's like somebody likes meat and somebody likes chicken. Somebody likes beef, somebody likes chicken. I said, no. Because it doesn't really matter what you eat. What I'm talking about matters for eternity. And he said, see ya. He's been so brainwashed by his culture that he's immersed himself in, that he is terrified to hear the truth. And our culture today is so terrified by that what they believe might be wrong that when we come along and say you have to believe in Jesus, they rebel against it, sometimes with anger. They don't want to hear the truth. And maybe you came in today not wanting to talk about death. And maybe you really don't want to hear the truth because it's a hard truth that Jesus is the only way to have life. It's a hard truth. Might be a hard truth for you because you're saying, well, I'm not sure I want to go all in with Jesus. It might be a hard truth for you because you got good friends who believe other things, and you want to believe they're going to be okay when they die, and they're not. And you know they're not. And you know that Jesus is the only way because right now he is embedding that in your heart, and he is drawing you to himself, and you know you need to do something with it, and what you need to do is you just need to relinquish your pride, your ego. And you need to believe what's true. Not because it'll make you feel better, but because it's true and it's right. And he's the only way. Because one of two things is going to happen when you die. When you die, you're going to suffer in flames for all eternity because you don't have Jesus, or when you die, you're going to live with Jesus in bliss and happiness and joy for all eternity. And he is the deciding factor. Where do you stand today? Let's pray.